Just gonna throw this out there. I'm gonna try and blast through a lot of this early stuff fairly quickly. It's pretty wordy. Wordy stuff tends to go in one ear, out the other, and then we'll get to some of the more fun stuff towards the end when we talk about skills, tools that we can use, how we apply them at the Olympics, how I apply them in the NCAA, and then we can kind of brainstorm a little bit about how we can do that for our own teams depending on what level that we're coaching there as well, right? So we'll blast through that. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end also. I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity for just a general Q&A for any questions, whether it is about this topic or anything about the Olympics or what we do in the national team gym currently for the staff that we have on board as it is. So it'll just kind of go scouting early and then just straight up free for all after that, right? So I'm more than happy to field any questions. So just kind of move on, just real quick again. My name's Jeff Liu. I've been coaching for longer than I can count, even though I look like I'm still 12 years old. So right now I'm the assistant coach at Grand Canyon University. I joined them in July 2020. The original plan was to join them after the 2020 Olympics, but then hey, COVID, right? So I stayed on. I was with USA from 2017 through the Tokyo Olympics. Prior to that, I was the tech coordinator at USC, and then I coached a year. That's when I met Marwan when I got to UMBC as my first D1 coaching job. I had coached D3, bunch of club, high school, all that kind of stuff. Ran a club out in Connecticut for a number of years. So I can definitely relate to those experiences of struggling to find gym time and trading services to get into a YMCA gym for like, whatever you can do. So that's me. What is scouting? I'm going to go through, this is more my definition and how I classify this. A lot of times people talk about scouting as it's all about the opponents. We're trying to create game plans. But for me, it's really just my process of creating an objective analysis. Okay. I want to know what actually happened, so I can better have a game plan for what might happen down the road, right? And you can talk about that as being for the opposing team. We've talked about that overall. Individual athletes on the other team, you got to know their tendencies. And where people miss the idea of scouting is also the idea of, it's my team. How do I scout my own team? How do I scout my own players? And I was talking about this with John and Eric before you guys came up, but the one thing that I think a lot of people miss, they're the coaches. Because all coaches have certain tendencies as well. And how they like to adjust, what systems they like to run. Some coaches do the same thing after timeouts every single time. If you can pick up on that stuff, especially when you guys play against the same coaches over and over again, whether it's in conference and your high school teams, or you just are in the same pool every tournament in region, right? That stuff happens. We can take advantage of that kind of information as well. So, why is it important for us to go through this objective analysis? Well, one, we want to make sure we challenge preconceived opinions about what the facts are. Sometimes we go in and we just make these assumptions because, oh, that's just the way it's been forever. But it may not be what's actually happening right in front of you, or it may not be what has happened in the last 2 or 3 matches of your opponent. So what we know can be based on outdated information. Whether it's the opposing team, opposing players, or just volleyball in general and where the sport is going, what we know can be based on outdated information. So can I be up to date with what's actually going on? What I saw when I was either watching the video or just there watching it live could be inaccurate. How many times have you turned to your assistant coach and said, hey, where did that ball go when the opposing attacker hit it? You saw it outside the outside blocker. My assistant coach saw it in the seam. Which one is right? You'll have to review that at some point to actually get that information correct so I can actually make some adjustments with my blocking defense. What we do could be more ineffective than we think. What systems am I trying to implement? What techniques am I trying to teach? Maybe less effective than you think it actually is, but you'll never know that unless you study. I need to have a more objective view of what's going on before I can make some educated decisions on how I want to coach. Right? So we talk about that. We talk about the concept of less is more a ton. You'll hear it at coaching clinics all over the place. Less is more. Simple is better than complex. We hear that a lot, especially when it comes to technique. Same thing applies to scouting. Some people love to gather all this information and not know what to do with it. Some people like to have all this information and give it to your 14-year-olds and say, you need to know what all this means. Meanwhile, they're still trying to figure out what an overlap is. Okay, so we need to decide what is important. Generally speaking, simple is better than complex, even when it comes to scouting. And when it comes to game plans and making adjustments in match, we also know that information retention is pretty limited, especially when you're stressed. There's only so much you can remember and process when you're in a stressful situation in the middle of a match. 24-24 at the end of the set. Am I going to remember that, okay, if the ball is passed 12 feet off the net towards area 2 and the right side attacker is coming around, they never run that, they run the go. How many of our 16-year-olds are going to remember that information? How many of my 25-year-olds are going to remember that information? Very few. So we need to make some pretty educated decisions on what is important to us. So I'm going to read you a quote here. This is Michael Gersh, who's the GM, general manager of the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team. Baseball, we've all heard of Moneyball at this point. It's probably the most advanced or most well-known sport for advanced analytics that's out there right now. And there's a web blog called Fangraphs that is just a deep dive into all the fancy stats on the baseball side. And they did a little interview with Michael Gersh. And the question was, is the majority of new information valuable, or is it necessary to meticulously dig through it in order to find something particularly meaningful? That's a lot of words to basically say, you got a lot of numbers. Do you have to dig through it for hours and hours and hours to find something useful, or do you already know what you're looking for? And Michael Gersh will say, it's a little bit of both, right? If you don't know what you're looking for, you can get lost in all the information that you're gathering. So you've got to go into the situation with a question you are trying to answer. Otherwise, you dig yourself a big old hole in nothingness, which I am guilty of as well. You gather a ton of information, and you're just hoping to stumble upon something interesting, rather than going into it with a set goal of what I'm trying to study. Okay. So that being said, we need to figure out as coaches what information is relevant to my level of play. Because what I might be studying at the Olympic level may not be entirely relevant to your 11 and unders who are playing volleyball for the first time. Right?
No?
Might not. But you talk about something like, hey, passing the ball off the net's better than passing the ball over the net, that may still be relevant, right? What information can I realistically gather and interpret? What resources do I have? What skill set do I have? How much time do I have to dedicate to this? Especially those of you out there who are not full-time scouts where this is your job, right? What information is most important out of all that for us to know about our opponents, about our team, and what information is most important for us to share amongst our coaching staff, and then eventually to the players on our team. We need to make all those decisions. And again, if we go back to the idea of less is more, generally speaking, simple is better than complex when it comes to this, to the idea of scouting. So how do we go through this process of scouting? Well, first, you gotta gather data, right? For me, and this is kind of my process, I'm gathering information on individual players, on a cumulative over a long period of time, so it's a lot of data instead of just one match, because there are flukes that happen, right? individual players and how they perform and what they do in specific rotations, what teams do in specific rotations as well, and what teams do overall in the grand scheme of things. We know a team is particularly weak in serve receive, we know we can get after them that way. If we know that they only set one player in one rotation, we can adjust things that way as well. But we've got to gather all this information. How do we do that? Not everybody is blessed with extremely large budgets where they can outsource stuff to services that you might have heard of, like volumetrics and things like that. Well, you watch a lot of video, or you're charting things live. So the checklist that we go through on the USA side anyways, and I kind of stole this from Lucas Lave, who was one of our other assistant coaches, who ran our defense and block. Generally speaking, you want to have at least 3 to 4 matches worth of data. If you go off of one match, I don't know how relevant that's going to be because they may have been playing a specific way against a specific team's type of defense, or serving a specific way because of how the team they were playing against sets up their serve receive, right? So I want a large enough sample size that things are actually relevant, okay? I want to chart their in-system offense, whether it's on first ball, in transition, separated altogether, whatever it is. I want to know how they run when things are good, right? Because then probably something middle's a little more. How do they play out of system? Vast majority of teams, what do they do out of system? Chuck it to the outside hitter, but not everybody. Sometimes you have setters who get a little bit more adventurous than that. We got to know before we start releasing our blockers certain ways. I want to know what they do by rotation. So, what play calls they're running, what patterns are they showing, what weaknesses do they have in specific rotations, and you're going to look at that for the team as well as individual players that we talked about on the last slide. And then this is the one that I have the most fun, is on video, reading the setters. What do they show you? How many times do we see setters who set up like this, and then all of a sudden our middles are still going to go block the go, right? What kind of things can the setter tell me that gives me an advantage on the defensive end? And then there are certain tendencies that setters have as well. What does she do when she's going down to a knee? What does she do when the ball is off the net? What does she do if she's backpedaling, going backwards? Is she all short string, just going right behind her? Or does she freak out and just chuck a go, which just dies 15 feet inside on the other way, right? I have a lot of fun with the setter tells thing because every now and then you find a little butt kick, right? And then you can play with things that way too. And then some historical information. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but if you play the same teams or the same athletes, even if you're coaching club and you're with the 15s, but you're with a club that you tend to stay with your team, you go 15s to 16s to 17s. Oftentimes you face up against the same teams, same players, season after season. What do we know about that team's identity? This is maybe more relevant for international coach, like pro, college, high school, when your group is together a lot longer. But every coach has tendencies. They build their team certain ways to have a certain identity. This is a team that is all about transition offense, right? They serve well, they get you out of system, they dig well, they try and counterpunch. Or this is a team that they don't defend well, but they're going to first ball side out, and we've got to slow them down in first ball. This is a team that is all middle driven. They just try and pump their middles. Every team has some sort of a personality, something of an identity. Can we pick up on that? That's largely, again, talking about now scouting coaches. What do they like to do? And then individual athletes have tendencies. Is she all cross-body with her arm swing? Is she all wrist away? Does she freak out when the set's not perfect and tip out every single time, right? All those kinds of things we can pick up as well. So, as coaches, I need to identify what information do I have? What out of that information can I use to put together a game plan? What information out of that maybe doesn't go in the game plan, but I just kind of keep in my back pocket, knowing that this situation happens sometimes, and it can help me give information to my team to react while we're in the middle of the set. Coming out of a timeout, I can relay something from the sideline. there's always some little information that you might just have in your back pocket, because it doesn't happen all the time, but maybe this situation is coming up and this coach loves to do this over and over and over again, right? And then what information out of all that do I actually pass on to my players? That is the one where I feel like a lot of people get tricked up, where they feel like they have to give too much. So we need to decide what's important for them to know. What information can they understand? How savvy is your team with respect to the tactics of it, or understanding the numbers, or knowing how to watch video? You will be surprised how many All-American Division I athletes come to the national team gym and cannot identify what rotation the other team is on the other side of the net. What can they understand? I can't just throw everything at you and assume that you know what I'm talking about because I understand it, right? Same thing for me right now. I gotta figure out what I can say and what we can do, right? How much is too much information that I'm giving them? How quickly do I get to information overload? Sometimes it's just saying they're gonna set the go, and that's too much. So we need to coach them probably at least a step or two beyond that, but we need to figure out where our team is with their capabilities. And is there anything that we share that doesn't have to go to the whole team, right? If I need to tell my setters that, hey, their middles love to release, so you're gonna have easy isolation opportunities overhead, does my libero really need to know that? Probably not, right? So there's some stuff that you might just keep to your specific position groups, right? Because certain information is just gonna go in one ear, out the other, and you're just gonna bore kids at that point. They'll check out for stuff that you might want them to listen to after that. Save the position-specific stuff for when you meet with that specific position group or that specific athlete, whatever it is. Okay. So here's where we get to the nitty-gritty of it. How do I do all this stuff? What tools and skills can I use? Pen and paper, pencil and paper, whatever you want to say. Okay, chart stuff by hand. That's where I'm going to end up asking you guys questions, because I'm kind of curious how you guys do stuff as well. You can translate a lot of information into Excel afterwards. You can get all fancy and expensive and go into the data volley station route, where you're actually charting a bunch of stuff and coding all the matches and things like that. And then, if any of you work in enterprise, work corporate, some of you may be familiar with R, Tableau, Power BI. These are all tools that you can use with big data to either crunch numbers and or do more from a data visualization standpoint. Okay. Pen and paper, I'll just show you a couple of examples here, just for what we use at GCU. So our assistant coach, Abby, when she's watching video and charting what teams do, not only is she going to show what rotation and what's their serve-receive pattern like, what the personnel is, but she wants to know what's the play call that they ran. So this first repetition or this first receive, they ran a go, one, we call it a wave, you might call it a red or a 5, just the in-system ball to the opposite. Number 9 passed it, the pass was graded a 2, so it's a medium pass, and they ended up setting the go to number 16, who errored out of it. Okay, so this is a fairly typical chart. There's a lot of different versions of this, but this is how she goes about her process of understanding what does this team like to do in this rotation, and then eventually what do they do when they're in system versus out of system. And you can do all this stuff by hand. Okay. What I chart, and this is more in match, this is my in-match chart. There's a lot going on here, but I want to know where we started, where they started in that rotation, or in that set. Did we serve, receive, and what rotation we started in? As we go through the rest of the charts here, it really comes down to, I draw out our patterns and our team, our serve, receive pattern, because I'm running our offense. But I want to know, where did we set the ball? Who passed the ball and what the quality of the pass was, right? Where did we attack and what was the result? little hard to see on the projection right here, but you know, obviously we set nothing overhead in this rotation. Okay, maybe I want to diversify my offense a little bit. We'll talk about that. But then I also know who are their servers and where do they serve from in each of these sets. My sets are color coded, so black is the first set, blue is the second set, green was the third set. And then these dots here just mean, hey, this was a side out, a clean side out, just a dot. Dot with a circle was the service error. So I side it out, but I didn't earn it, right? And anywhere here, like there's a number 8, that means they scored on point number 8. They earned 8 on that one. So this just helps me know if you see a bunch of numbers and no dots in this row, we got stuck in that rotation. I gotta figure out why. What happened? Is it because a specific passer was getting targeted and she was struggling, so we couldn't run our in-system offense? Is it because we're just setting the wrong option and they just kept getting done or kept airing out? Do I need to make a substitution and just choose a different play call? I can glean all of that from this as well. I take some general notes as I go through my scouting process here as well. So this is for me because I call our serving targets as well. So in row 1, I want to attack the 5-16. Row 2, I can go 1 or 5. And then their specific players. Number 6 really does not like to receive a ball coming from zone 1. Conversely, number 9 doesn't like to receive the ball when she's in zone 1. And she attacks 5% worse after she has to pass the ball to attack versus when she doesn't pass to attack. Number 18, just attack her line. She loves having more time to react on that cross-court ball versus going down the line. So this is all stuff that you can chart by hand. It gets cumbersome, and I understand that. Okay, but this is the kind of information that you could eventually have at your disposal if you have the time, the resources, probably some help, right, to be able to chart this kind of stuff out. So I talked about you can take some of the paper stuff and translate it to Excel. I used to do this when I was coaching club as well because I think Marlon was talking about you want to measure everything in your own gym. So now we're talking about scouting my own team. I want to know who my best passers are, and that's an easy one for me to chart out on the whiteboard. Take a picture of the whiteboard, bring that home, and I enter it into Excel at the end, and I can see how people are improving or not improving throughout the season. I can see who the better and worse passers are. Maybe she looks great with her technique, but the ball just never goes where it's supposed to go, and this other girl likes to do a lot of this stuff, right? But somehow it goes to target. You choose your priorities then. Am I gonna play the girl who looks good, or am I gonna play the girl who puts the ball where it needs to go, and then continue to work with her to improve her technique? But you gotta measure everything. So you can use Excel to do that. But you can also use Excel to get a little bit further in. So this I did when I was at USC, and you've all heard of heat maps before, right? You don't need a fancy application to do heat mapping, you can do it in Excel. So as you're charting where their attacks are going, you can plot that out, and I just do it across 36 zones because that's what Databall gave me, but you can do this by hand as well. And with what they call conditional formatting, you just build a rule into it that says, hey, if there's a higher number, it's gonna be a darker color. If there's a smaller number, it's gonna be closer to white. And you can just see the hot spots for where these attackers like to go. This was top rows outside hitter Mary Kate Marshall for Oregon State. And you can see a difference here, right? In system, she's gonna be a little more all over the place, but definitely more cross court. Once it's a high ball, she loved to go up and just snap high over the top of the block to the line seam. So if you know that information between in-system high ball versus in-system ball, can you make defensive adjustments there as well, right? So this is stuff that you can actually do by hand and translate into Excel. This is what I was talking about a little bit more about charting an individual player's passer rating throughout the season. Some of you might use a 0 to 3 scale. Like, oh, she passed a 2.1, that kind of thing. You might have the same thing, but use a 4-point scale, where 4 is like a perfect pass, and a 3 is a good pass. At the national team level, and a lot of colleges are using this now too, is using what's called expected first ball side out. Basically, you chart out the history of your level of play. So this would be international, or if I was doing it in the Pac-12 or whatever it is, what's the first ball side out percentage on a perfect pass? What's the first ball side out percentage across the whole conference on a good pass, medium pass, poor pass, all that kind of stuff. And then using that as your weights in your passer rating scale. So instead of a generic 0, 1, 2, 3, you have something that has a little bit more context to it, to what's actually going on in the match, right? So just throw it out there, at least on the women's national team side, on a perfect pass, you would expect the first ball side out 51% of the time. So instead of a 4, I'm giving her a 0.51, right? On a good pass, you're gonna first ball side out at about 47% of the time. So instead of a 3, I'm gonna give her a 0.47. Medium passes, I think 39% of the time, go first ball side out. So then the 2 pass, the medium pass, is actually a 0.39. And that's kind of how you do your math on the way down, as you study for your own level. But again, just seeing the trending of this athlete throughout the season here, actually fairly consistent. We'd love to see the numbers trend upwards a little bit more throughout a season, but once you get to be, I'm trying to remember who this player was, this might have been Megan Courtney, but once you get to the fact that you're 25, 26, 27 years old, there's only so much more development that you do, right? Also in Excel, just other types of charts and stuff like this. This was just a general one talking about why we run fast in our gym. USA Fast, you'll hear Carter talk about that all the time. But higher is better, that's our hitting efficiency. And left, middle, right columns is how fast in jumps our set was from setter contact to hitter contact. So generally speaking, you're looking at the faster we ran, the higher efficiency we were as an offense. And then different colors within the columns are just the different seasons from 2017 through 2019. But we studied that as well to try and figure out what tempo should I actually run. I would not suggest you try and run USA Fast Go with your 14-year-olds. Let's work on my approach timing first, before we go into that kind of stuff, right? Data volley station, I won't go through these in specifics, but there's just so much more information you can gather when you are charting and grading every single contact that happens in a game. So when I'm data volleying, when I'm charting matches, I am recording every touch, who touched it, what the touch was, how good the touch was, where did it come from, where did it go, how many blockers were up, what was the play call, what was the middle route when we set something else. All that is being graded. Where was she on the floor? Did she pass it on her right? Did she pass it on her left? Did she pass it with her hands? So that you can gather all this information and pull all these different stats out of it. So the fun ones for me, at least that I still do at GCU, scouting the opposing passers, is how do they side out in different rotations based on where the serve is going on their part of the court. This is just an overall breakdown of how efficient we are at different attacks, overall first ball in transition, and then the opponents, what they are. This is just another way shot chart that you'll get. Instead of 6 billion lines, you draw cones that designate sort of the wedges of, generally speaking, what direction they're going. Because otherwise, if you do a ton of matches, you just end up with a black chart because there's just so many lines. Blast past this. R, Tableau, and Power BI gives you the ability to do some other things. This was our 2017 season, our kill percentage by where the set location was, so where was our center on the court. And so the closer to red we were, the more efficient we were when the pass went to that location. So obviously, go figure, a perfect pass allows us to be more efficient. But there's some other interesting ones too, where we find this ball off the net towards zone 2, we were super efficient because we were able to still run our slide from there, still run the red or the in-system balls were opposite on the short string super fast. So it's really tough for the blockers to have to react to that. This next one, this heat chart here is just showing, this is Lauren Carlini setting the slide. Where is she comfortable setting the slide from? So obviously, perfect pass, she's real comfortable. We got to a point in the season where we started talking about, hey, we want more dots, right? I want to expand this range to where I'm more comfortable setting the slide from further away on the long string, from off the net, all that kind of stuff. You can chart that. And this is another way to show this. This is Jordan Poulter setting the red. The green dots designate where we had kills. The X's in orange or red are errors are getting blocked. And there's some gray circles, open circles, you may or may not be able to see. Those are just other attempts that were dug or played, right? But clearly Jordan's pretty comfortable setting the red from off the net in the middle of the court. This is something that you can do on paper as well. I like having my setters go through this homework and scout themselves. And you just give them a piece of paper, they draw a court, you give them 3 colors of markers or crayons or pens or whatever you want to use, and they just watch video of themselves in the last 2 matches, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden they can see themselves. What do I do? Can I expand my range further? Or should I maybe stop setting that ball from way off here because they're all red, right? I need to get better at this before I do it from here, right? So there's a lot of stuff you can do on paper yourself that can recreate this. Other stuff in R that you can do, I'll just show you real quick. This is R. It's literally a programming language. I don't suggest most of you dive into that unless you need to. But there are other things that you can do. So I built this tool to help me in scouting as well. And this helps me in my scouting. So for instance, this setter from Cal Baptist, right? I can kind of draw a little square where she's setting the ball from. Let me just do this on first ball and reception. And notice here, it shows you your distribution. So the fat bars are how often she's set there. The skinny bar in the middle is the hitting efficiency. She obviously loves setting her opposite, especially when she's pushed back to zone 2. But even on perfect pass, she just loves setting her opposite. So if I know that, of course I can break this down by rotation, I can set up my defense a certain way. This is just other ways that I can expedite my process of scouting, right? Let's pass that. So, what did we do at the Olympics? Less is more. I didn't give them 300 pages worth of data. We narrowed it down, we ran our block and defense, had 3 worksheets, 3 pieces of paper, and then the heat maps. Tama, who also helped with our defense, but also did our serve receive, had just 1 sheet of paper, and then heat maps to help with Luca. And then Aaron, who ran our offense, had just 1 worksheet, where she was looking at the other team's essentially attacking and blocking numbers, right? So what do those look like? All 3 of them would look at this sheet. I call that the rotational details and distribution. It's a whole ton of information. Basically, they'll get 6 of this top row, row 1 through row 6, and it tells me who played. This is Brazil, I think in BNL 2018. Who played, what their attacking numbers are, what their reception numbers are, their in-system attacking versus transition attacking, and then their distribution as a team. So where did they set most often? Clearly, this team in rotation 1 liked to run a go, wave, and a 1 or a tight quick, right? They didn't really run much of anything else. In transition, all go, right? So you can kind of figure this information out this way, versus, or comparing it also to what Aaron or Tama or Luca might be charting by hand as they're watching video, right? So I'm just giving them another way to look at the same information. Same thing here, reception numbers, so I can kind of choose my serving targets, blocking numbers, so I can know who maybe to attack and who maybe to avoid when we're running our offense. And then just an overall. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to interrupt me because it's more fun to make it interactive. We call this one the red sheet for obvious reasons. This is another one that Luca used to try to figure out how to exploit their offense. So not only do I have general reception numbers here by serve type, but to me the more interesting one is here. There are 2 outside hitters, we're number 1 and number 16, the top 2 in the row. Dimitrova, when she receives the ball, was hitting 430. When she didn't receive the ball, she was hitting 180. Conversely, Vasileva, when she received the ball, was hitting 070. When she didn't receive the ball, was hitting 220. So, if that's the case, that helps me decide really quickly who I want to serve between the two front row outsides, right? It's probably not going to be Dimitrova who hits 430 when she passes the ball and goes to attack. I'm going to attack the other girl who hits significantly worse when she has to pass to attack. And we can break that down by rotation as well.
Yeah. Question. So how do you translate all of this to practice?
Bringing it into our practice gym, I'll be perfectly honest, we don't.
So what is your practice philosophy then? Like how do you get your national team players who are like playing professionally better in your USA team?
Yeah.
To get them ready for this time.
So, as far as this is concerned, the players very rarely see this information. This is just for the coaches. So when Karch makes his serving signals from the bench and tells them where to attack, our players have some idea. We tell them a little bit of it. Hey, this is probably who we're going to attack the most often and why. But this is more for the coaches to have in their back pocket to make adjustments as the match is going on. In the practice gym, let's get better at playing volleyball. Right. Middle blocker breakdown. This is another thing Luca looked at. Good, like perfect good, medium pass. What do these middles like to run? How often do they run it? How efficient are they? Sometimes I'm going to give up the idea of double blocking something in the middle because she's hitting 100 on it. Good for you, right? But if she's hitting 600 on the slide, I'm definitely going to mirror and probably have a double block go with that slide attacker. And we can break that down then also by the quality of the pass, right? And that's a lot of times coaches sometimes will give blocking signals to their blockers. Hey, like on this ball, hey, a perfect pass, I want you to step this way, right? And then make your reaction from there. Again, that's more for the coaches to have in their back pockets to give adjustments to the players as the match is going on, right? And heat maps we already talked about. Obviously this attacker in system was a little bit more towards 6 in line seam, out of system, a lot to the deep corner. But if you combine both of them, that's a lot of area 6, right? So middle usually works pretty well for us. And then the GOAT, we're talking about Karch here. Because he likes to do our serving signals, I give him a few extra tidbits of information as far as how passers, how efficient they are, receiving a ball coming from one zone to another zone, by rotation, how they side out by rotation, all that kind of stuff too. So, what did we share with our players? This is it. We gave them one page. I had to cut it in half because it wouldn't fit on the page, but what we expect the rotation to be, some general notes. So we want to attack them with our serve. They're a physical and scrappy team. We always need to know where number 6 is. Our bingo goals, this is something Karch started doing in the 2016 quad, but basically these are our goals within a set of what we believe we have to execute in order to win that set. So obviously against this team, I wanted to at least have one sequence where I first ball killed 3 times in a row. Or I wanted to serve them out of system 10 times and have at least one non-center kill. That's a kill from like a libero setting it or any non-center setting it. One middle trans kill and 2 sequences of good passes. We'd like to stop about 60% of the time we want to be in system. So can we do it twice where 3 out of 5 of passes are in system, right? And this is how we translate some of that information from the red sheet. She's my serving target. Cool. That's about all we really have to tell our players because you go into the nitty-gritty of the details there just over their heads. And notice that our attack charts are extremely simple. It's a single line through the center of their attack fan or wedge or whatever you want to call it, where generally most of their attacks are going in that direction. And we don't give a ton of information. We play our default defense. You need to be great at your default defense, and you might make small adjustments here or there. So there's not a lot of notes about this player's here, that player's there, this player's doing this. It's some reminders about our block lineup, and every now and then we'll talk about, hey, be ready for jump, this player is gonna tip out a lot, right? Or, hey, middles on the tight quick, she likes to go a little bit more to 5'6", you might guide that direction a little bit. But there's not a ton we do that talks about things that are not within our default system. Okay. And then, same thing, but here's some of the center read stuff that I talked about when I'm looking at center tendencies. And then when Aaron's looking at the opposing middle blockers. This is probably a bad example to use because they're all yellow, kind of average blockers. But we like to use the stoplight system. So if it was red, probably don't want to set in front of her because she's like a shutdown blocker. If it's green, and say the 2012 Olympic Games when Japan had a 5'2" center in the front row, maybe get accurate on that side, right? So we use red, yellow, green for there, and then just some general quick notes about the blockers and their tendencies. Some blockers are pretty undisciplined with their hands. Some are super jumpy on perfect pass. Some just aren't particularly quick laterally, right? We can take advantage of all that if your setters can interpret that kind of information, right? So how's it different in college? It's not. Okay. You need to know what information is relevant, and you need to know the capability of your team to understand it and execute it. So the only thing different is maybe what that level is, right? And you'll do the same to translate from any level that you're coaching, right? So we talk about, this is what I give to my GCU team. There's a couple things that are different compared to the national team one. What do you guys see that's maybe missing compared to the last one? Bingo goals are missing, right? And the blocker notes. Because quite frankly, we weren't savvy enough to be able to take advantage of that information. Why give them anything to maybe muddle the picture of what they need to be focused on if we're not going to realistically use it? Same thing with the bingo goals. Because for us, it was just more, hey, can we just pass the ball a little better, please? Like, that's really all it came down to, right? I feel like that's fairly common. Okay. So then wrapping up, at any level, what can we do regardless of what level of coaching? Well, you got to know what information you have. We talked about that. What information you can gather. What can your team use, right? So for all the skills and the tools that we talked about earlier, what are we capable of doing for my team? Now, as club coaches, that's even harder because we all got full-time jobs on top of that. So how much time can I realistically dedicate to do some of this stuff? Is there somebody, an assistant coach, that can help you? I would suggest not using parents, but it's just certain things are important for us to measure. So what can we realistically do for our team, right? Where can I maybe better allocate my time if my time is super limited, as opposed to doing some of the scouting? Well, I want to daily debrief my team's work. I want to actually spend the time going back and thinking about how did that practice that I just ran, how did our team execute? How did I execute? How effective was the practice that I planned? I want to make sure I go through that every single day. And Karch is religious about us doing this every single day. And he goes around the office and every single person on staff, whether it's an assistant coach, a performance analyst, our strength coach, our athletic trainer, everybody gives feedback to how did our team do today? Where can we get better? How did we do as a staff? How can we get better? Right? Every single day. You can spend more time watching video of your team because, like we said, some of your preconceived notions may be inaccurate because what you saw live may just have happened so fast you didn't get a super accurate view of it. You can go back and review that on video as well. Spend more time after you debrief and watch a video of what's going on, whether it's matches or practice, planning more effective practices. And you guys are hearing a ton about that this weekend, about how to better do that, right? I'll let Marlon talk to that more and John talk about that more, okay? And then just get better at volleyball. When it comes down to it, honestly, if you're the better volleyball team, you usually win more matches. Alright? Grass is green, this is a little story I stole from Luca. While he was an assistant coach at BYU men's, Carl McGowan at the time was a volunteer assistant for the former head coach, and then his son took over, and then Carl was still lingering around as a volunteer assistant. So Carl rolls into the gym, he goes up there, I'm gonna coach this player. Okay, Carl, go ahead, coach this player. And he walks up to the player and he just goes, hey, puts his arm around his shoulder, grass is green, sky is blue. You're just not a very good volleyball player yet, right? We just gotta get to work and just get better at volleyball. So through all this conversation, you need to decide how much time is worth you reallocating to the measuring of things versus getting better at volleyball. How much of that time that you reallocate to measuring things helps you plan more effective practices to help you get better at volleyball? I don't think anybody here can answer that question for anybody else in the room. It comes down to what we think is best for our team. Yeah.
What was the percentage of out of system in Tokyo, the combined of all the games that you played?
I don't
For the US?
have the number on, specific number on top of my head right now, but I would tell you if we're talking about in reception alone, somewhere around that 50 to 54% range out of system.
In service.
In service. And then of course in transition, because pro players hit so dang hard, a higher percentage of that is out of system when we talk about transition play off the dig.
Okay, so do you, in practice, 50% of the time practice out of system?
In the USA gym, we focus on our in-system offense a lot more than our out-of-system offense.
Okay.
Reason being is we have identified for our team that one, every season we are one of the top 2 passing teams in the world, and that our bread and butter is our first ball offense. So we need to continue to sharpen that sword. We will reallocate time, a good amount of time, to some out-of-system attack tools. We'll do that in some attack focus, we'll call it attack school, or whatever it is, in our practices to work on some of expanding our toolkit for out-of-system solutions. But we focus on our in-system offense a lot more in some of the breakout portions of practice, because once we get to 6-on-6, so much of a percentage of that is already out of system naturally anyways, we don't need to force that into the situation as much.
And if you compare that with NCAA, what would be the percentage in NCAA?
I mean, shoot, there were teams that were only 29% in system that I played against at the D1 level this season.
Okay.
And when we served against them, we actually got that number to drop even further. So it depends on your gym and your personnel, but in our conference, I would say you're looking at in first ball, 60% out of system on first ball versus 50% in system on first ball at the international level. So again, you need to measure it based on your level of play, because if you're coaching 12 and unders, what percentage is probably going to be out of system? Probably more than 50%, right? So you're going to talk about planning your practices a little bit differently.
Okay. And what advice would you give us about planning practices for club level or high school level volleyball?
Now, can you take it to another, you made 2 pretty important statements you can share with them. You probably don't know the numbers per se, but you talked about breakout group and 6-on-6. If you had a 2-hour practice, just because that's what they have, or if you have a 3-hour practice, we'll say you have a 3-hour practice, how much time were you breaking out and how much time were you 6-on-6? Just percentages of totaling 100.
At the national team level, we have 2.5-hour practices, so it's not so far off. What we're doing at a bare minimum, 50% of that is 6-on-6. At least 50% of that is in a 6-on-6 scenario. Now we may script certain things in that drill that we're running to force certain scenarios, but it's in a 6-on-6 environment. So at least 50% of that at the national team level is in a 6-on-6 environment.
Back to his question.
Yeah, when I was coaching my 15 and unders team, I would say we actually did a little bit less of that in 6-on-6 because we had to spend more time just teaching basic technique. I mean, my club team was all the girls who got cut from their freshman and JV teams or just playing the level for the first time. Again, this is Connecticut. They don't start at 11, 12, 13 years old. They all start when they show up in high school, right? So we spent a lot more time earlier on in the season just here's some basic technique stuff. How quickly can we get to being good enough at it that we can then start to play, and then as soon as possible trying to build that into 6-on-6. But we had a roster of 10, so it was like 5-on-6 when I had to jump on the court. But you have to figure out where your priorities lie. You always want to make it more game-like because it translates better. The transfer is better from a motor learning perspective. But if you can't tie your shoes and chew gum at the same time, it's going to be hard for me to ask you to play a 6-on-6 scenario. So you need to know where your team is and where your skill level is at before you can force the issue into the gameplay. But in general, 6's scenarios are going to translate better to teach the techniques of in it. You just have to structure the drill to force certain scenarios. So if I'm working on left side hitter out of system toolkit, you can do a virus drill where you're on the court, somebody bowls a ball to you, and you intentionally pass it out of system. So we have to play a 6-on-6 scrimmage initiated by a setter coming from off the net, setting a high ball to your outside, and then you're working on playing 6s, but also working on that high ball offense and your attacking toolkit, those kinds of things. So you can build a lot of that into the 6-on-6 scenarios.
I'm asking all the questions as you notice. We just did a drill with a row 5-1 system, row 1, stack and split, and we moved the outside from the right all the middle to the left. How much do you see that in the NCAA?
A lot. You're going to find a lot more, I'll call it creativity in the NCAA than you will internationally. One, because more rosters have more holes, so you have to figure out how to cover for some of those weaknesses. But two, you also have, John, what is it, 439 substitutions per set you can use?
I think it's up to 500.
Okay, so you get about 500 substitutions in the NCAA. Versus international, you get 6, and you have 1 re-entry. So if you sub out, you come back in,
3 people.
that's it.
That's it. The other 3 can't do that.
So generally speaking, most teams use their substitutions. They'll go 3 rotations with a double sub to get an opposite back to the front row, and they bring in their second setter in the back row, and you have 3 rotations to do that. And then they're either going to save those last 2 subs at the end for a serving sub, for 1 service turn for one of their middles, because liberos are not allowed to serve internationally, or for a blocking sub in the front row. They might just decide to throw a blocking sub in the front row at some point. So you have a lot less opportunity to mix pieces around, and a lot of teams are less apt to move row 1 specifically from that stack to split. Most teams stay in the split pattern internationally because they have opposites who can hit the go. USA, you'll see us run a stack more often and just run our opposites all the way around the court, called the runaround, so that she can hit from her natural position. We found the numbers worked out significantly better when we had her hitting her natural position than her unnatural position, especially long handers.
So when I was watching Tokyo, and I was kind of like, I heard some data, and I mean, I know that we have to stay up to date, like you said. Previously, I talked to Joe Trinzi, and back, I think in 2016, they were not promoting the back row attack. And now I saw the back row attack in Tokyo was a killer.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Two pieces of it. One, we wanted to stay USA fast, but we wanted to diversify our offense. And there's certain situations where, say, your opposite rolls up to pick up a tip, she can't transition to really hit anything at that, or she went to the ground, right? You need to have another option. It can't just be outside, 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 outside. And what happened is we eliminated the back row attack a altogether, and teams were just double, tripling down on our outside hitters. Okay, that started to become an issue. But two, we also, in system, we talked about our bread and butter was our in-system offense. We wanted 4 offensive routes on every play. I don't care if it's first ball, out of system, transition, whatever. We want to try and get 4 offensive routes in every position. So if there's a 3-hitter set in the front row, you got your outside, you got your middle, you got your opposite in the front row, and you got your other outside coming out of the back row. Think about that as a blocker at the net. There's a lot going on for as fast as USA runs. So that creates more seams for us. But I would say the biggest difference maker was personnel. We had some personnel changes in certain positions that turned out to be significantly more efficient than other personnel that we had on the roster in previous seasons. Not just 2016 earlier, but even 2019, 2018, whatever it is.
Would you say you had more dynamic middles?
To me, I would say it was probably more a resurgence on the left and new players on the right, more so than it was the middle. Our middles are, USA middles are just good.
Alright.
If Marwan would let somebody else go over edgewise, I don't know.
Now I got another hand here. He's gonna rest his voice now. I got another hand.
Yes.
I only do this for my team, and I'm a very, 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 very basic, you know, did it bump, did it go over there, was it good, did it land right in front of him? But, so I have a A and a B team, I coach at a school, and in order to try and get the B team more involved, I would invite one of them to come and to do that, to keep track. And I kind of thought of it as like a learning, like tool or whatever. I don't know, what do you think about that, or is it like, maybe I should have someone with more experience doing it?
If you were using it as a teaching tool, love it. Right? The one thing you have to realize is you have to teach before they do it,
Right.
so they can learn what you want them to learn. You need to tell them what the standards are, because especially, and I used to do this coaching high school too, and you kind of rotate the responsibility around different players. You don't want that one girl, oh, I always have to take stats, like that whole thing. You rotate that responsibility around, and now you're trying to use those numbers as measurements throughout practice and season, all that kind of stuff. And then one girl is taking stats and she grades things one way, and another girl takes stats and she grades things way more generously. It's really hard to account for that in the numbers. So before you do that, making sure that we really help define what and how we're trying to chart certain things, so that if you are going to use those numbers down the road, they're a little bit more that way. But I do like doing that as a teaching tool. Other questions about literally anything?
So what is your basis of less is more? Like if you're just starting, what are you studying passing, serving?
Serve pass.
What?
Serve pass.
Serve pass. Okay.
Serve pass. That is the single, in my opinion, it's probably not only one of the more simple things to start charting by hand as things are going on, but it has a huge impact on the game, obviously. So serve and pass is the first thing that I usually have people when they first get to college and start learning how to do stats. I always start them with the serve and pass game. Because quite frankly, with as many substitutions as we have, and you look at Penn State and they carry between 4 and 9 DSs every season, you've got the opportunity to make some changes if you need to based on the rosters that we have in that specific skill, more so than in a lot of other skill sets. Because usually your top 2 hitters, there's usually in most rosters not a third and a fourth that are really pushing them that hard. But on the serve receive side, you got a lot of girls who tend to be, or guys too, who tend to be clustered pretty close together. So you have the opportunity to use that information to your benefit.
Jeff, what is the USA doing to choose liberos as far as metrics goes? Why would they choose one libero over another, other than statistically serve receive? Is there any other metrics that you guys are using to
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to look at the serve receive, but serve receive is the biggest one, right? We talked about our bread and butter is our first ball offense, so we need to make sure that we are really good at that skill. But the other thing, because we are charting literally every single contact on the floor, is what is our big percentage of balls that come within my range, my realm of responsibility? How many balls do I actually dig? And then out of those balls that I dig, how many are actually settable and hittable? Because you might have that player that sprays balls all over the place, but she doesn't let the ball drop. But if you just keep giving free balls back, it's not as impactful as you would like it to be. And then beyond that is a lot more subjective, I'm gonna say. But you watch a lot of the video, you're watching them play live. How hard do they work off the ball when they're not touching the ball? Are they making the moves to go cover? Are they continuing on their seam and service receive to back up the other passer? Are they communicating with their teammates? All that kind of stuff is a little bit more intangible because there's no real way to measure when they don't touch the ball. But that was a big thing, at least for our Olympic roster, was we even polled the athletes. Every single athlete went and chose their Olympic 12. And every girl on the roster chose their starting 7. And a big reason why we chose the roster we did was the confidence that their team had in those specific players in those position groups as well. Right? It is important to know that I have full trust of my team, and she has full trust in me. This is who I want, for the lack of a better term, in the foxhole next to me. I want to go to battle with these people, right? And that has an impact to just how you're able to sustain performance through really stressful situations. Versus all of a sudden, I don't like her that much. She's kind of a B, right? And then all of a sudden, right? It's just they don't support each other as much through those situations. So that's really important for us to kind of build our rosters that way as well.
So that was cooperative as a team.
Correct. There's a few podcasts that have gone out talking about it. Sue Enquist, who's an 11-time NCAA championship coach at UCLA, as well as won a championship there as a player. We brought her on as sort of a team culture, team building consultant. Right when COVID started, she came on as a guest speaker first, and we brought her on as a consultant. And she walked us through a lot of that, helping our team build a sustainable culture. When you think about it, these girls were not going to see each other for over a year and a half because of COVID, and they're all spread all across the world for most of the year. How do you build a sustainable high-performance culture when you have 1 hour on Zoom per month before you have to go compete as a national team, right? So building those relationships, and she was huge on democratizing how we operated as a program, and allowing the players a voice. They don't get the final say, that's still the coaching, right? But they get to have a voice, and the more they felt some autonomy, the more they buy in to what you're trying to do, right? But we were also dealing with professional athletes, right? So you can find that was Sue. Jordan Larson talked about it a lot on that same podcast. She did it with, there's an ESPN podcast with Julie Foudy, who's a former captain of the U.S. women's soccer team that won, I don't know, 3 World Cups in a row, 3 Olympics in a row, and every other tournament, whatever. She runs a podcast called Laughter Permitted. So she did a great interview with Sue and Jordan talking about that. Justine Longarantes, our libero, also talked about that process on a podcast called Real Pod with Victoria Garrett. She talked about that process as well. So you can find some insights if you guys want to pull up some of those interviews. I can link those to you guys if Eric can get you my email address and all that kind of stuff, and I can kind of link you guys to those as well. But it's an interesting kind of look into the thought process behind how we were able to better define and build teammateship to build a sustainable high-performance culture to where these girls wanted to go into battle, not only with each other, but then for each other. The for each other part is huge for us.
I have a question. So I wrote this down because I thought it was kind of funny. resources and help in order to do this, which, you know, I have a regular full-time job and I coach club, you know, for 14-year-olds, and sometimes the teams that we play is gonna be the first time we face them, and we may never play them again. I don't have an assistant, I don't have a competent parent, everything is going against me. So, you know, what would you say that it would be more important to just focus on the things on your side of that and then pick up things as you go along? I mean, cause I love all this stuff, I just wish I had the opportunity to utilize it. What would you say would be like for, you know, your regular old club coach, what should they focus on first, you know, first bit of a tournament?
Let's get better at volleyball. Focus on your side. And if you can start adding some measurements, annual measurements into your practices, whether you're doing up the video later or you have somebody just, you've got the whiteboard, here's 3 pass, 2 pass, 1 pass, 0 pass, and just hash marking it across, just so you can use it later. That's as fancy as sometimes you need to go, because that's all the time we have to allocate to it. But at least it gives me some frame of reference for something that is fairly actionable, right? Needs a few more reps on the serve receive side of practice, right? And we can restructure our practices to do that. Hey, and you can go a bit deeper to that eventually too, is hey, in this rotation we struggle to pass in the system. Now I have to go back and look at why. And maybe we practice a few more repetitions in that rotation in practice, right? To try and clean up some of those, maybe it's just a communication error between these 2 girls standing next to each other, right? You got your really vocal captain who's in zone 5, but in zone 6 and zone 1, they're mutes, right? That happens a lot, right? So can we build scenarios to help them break through that? So I would say find ways to measure your own team first, and then as you're charting in match, you're probably going to chart the same things. And if you can find a way to chart the same stat for both sides, especially the serve and pass we talked about, to me is the most important one. You can then gain some insights if your players are now skillful enough to hit those targets. Hey, this girl has passed only 1 ball in system this whole set. Let's probably keep hammering her, right? And just those little things can make a big difference when you don't have the time or resources to help to go a lot deeper into it than that.
Jeff, one of the back to something you said earlier, we were talking about liberos, and you said that they had a certain digging zone of theirs. Is that malleable? Is that something that you guys pick per player? Is it by size, or is it just by square feet on the court? How do you choose that area?
So based on our defensive system, let's see.
On the slide. Yes.
So hey, okay, I'm gonna do that. Our base defensive system, and this is a little bit, again, they're flowing a little bit out of it because they've already made a read off the pass, but we're kind of middle-esque, 2x2, roughly 2x2, punch, read, block system in the middle. Based on our defensive assignments within this range, because I'm the only one statting it, I'm able to kind of define whether that was her ball to dig or not. So rather than it just being like a square on the court of that's your ball, it is a little bit more free flowing, because there's also balls that maybe we asked Jordan on this ball to curl a little bit further for the tip, because they had tipped a few times there. Haley's gonna have a little bit more responsibility going this way for that little cut shot that goes across. So it's no longer purely a square on the floor, where this square would have been Jordan's. Well, no, her responsibility had changed. So it is a little bit malleable there, to steal your word.
And it's your decision. Like
It's
your
100%. It was, at least for this last 5 years, 100% my decision.
Oh wow. And then I have another
So on
question.
this ball was definitely Michelle Barge-Hackley, who quite frankly blew her assignment because she should have been middle, and she was a little bit to a step right, and where did it go? Middle. Your ball.
The other question I have, in the one loss you guys had, what was there statistically that stuck out, other than you were Monster Strike
The
Saturday.
butt whipping by Russia. Yeah. Couple things. One, obviously, we had a really hard time stopping their opposite. Now, the
The
time I got her over.
young one, right? The very young one?
No, you're thinking of Arina Fedoritseva, who's their
Outside.
17-year-old outside hitter. I'm talking about Natalia Goncharova, who's all of 6'5", 6'6", goofy-footed right-handed opposite, who the last time we played Russia with their A roster, I think she was 31 kills and 4 blocks against us in that match. So needless to say, she's pretty darn good. Okay, we had a hard time slowing her down. A big part of that was, to be perfectly blunt, our team was extremely undisciplined in our defensive systems. So as the pressure mounted, they started to, what Luca likes to call, go rogue. So, hey, I'm seeing this, and then I'm starting to kind of like flow around it, and all of a sudden I'm out of position, I'm unbalanced, versus I know my defensive responsibility. I should have been in the middle and just turned and faced the hitter. Instead, I'm opening up seams, and if one person is out of position, that makes everybody out of position, because now maybe that player is now thinking, I gotta flow this way to cover up that hole, and then everything starts to shift. So we had some issues in that match from a defensive standpoint of being super disciplined. And then after getting our butts whipped, the girls came together, honestly, on their own accord, had a team meeting, was like, we need to be better. And then they were a lot better.
So when you're teaching serve receive, you said serve receive is your strong skill. Do you go, okay, we're passing better this way, we're gonna teach this at practice, like right, left, middle, hands. How do you determine what you teach to keep that going?
I mean, it's been a lot of years of study of a lot of data to figure out where players are more efficient in general within the skill of volleyball at passing. The general rule of thumb, and I'm going to say this very specifically because I changed this in the way that I measured things versus previous people. You hear a lot about midline is the most efficient, and then left, and then right. The issue that I had with a lot of those measurements was they were measuring midline as anything from knee to knee was within your midline. But the way that Tama and I measured midline versus right versus left is, this is midline. This is still right, because I still have to pick the line of the serve that's going to my right to make this move. And we're so high in the emphasis of, you need to know where the line of the serve is going. I need to choose off the hand, right or left. Because even if I'm trying to get to midline, I need to pick a direction so my feet go that way. So to me, as I was measuring with Tama, this even was right, even though this was previously midline. This was left, even though this was previously midline. So those numbers went all out the window for us. Midline became one of our worst, because internationally, most of the time, midline was the ball that hits you in the chest and the throat. Versus, especially with the Mikasa ball, which has a tendency to move quite a bit more and even kind of come up on you sometimes. If you get caught in the midline internationally and the ball comes up on you, the only thing you can do is get caught in the throat. Especially because they're serving so hard. Versus even if I take my midline and take it just right over this knee, it floats up on me, I can still open up that hip, tilt, and get my angle to target. So for us, throughout this whole quad, was emphasizing how soon can I pick the line of serve, how soon and early can I tilt my platform to target. Because once I'm tilted, I can make adjustments pretty easy from here. Versus if I'm stuck here, there's not a line.
So right became much more efficient than midline.
Just outside of midline body line. The ideal scenario was you're kind of taking it over a hip or over a knee because you're just super solid there. But studying it for our roster, each player was more comfortable on the right or the left.
In one of the videos, I heard Karsh talk about covering all of this in servicing. Can you explain that for me, please?
There's just a lot of range where the ball can go. And if we talk about it, if I limit myself to what my feet can get me to try and take the ball on my belly button, that limits the range at which I can be super accurate. So I need to be really comfortable, and we use this a lot because your shoulders are kind of forward, and this whole range here, I can pass with my platform in this whole range and even over the top of my head by tipping my back and just tilting. So I need to be really good at identifying where that ball is going and being comfortable at just knowing what angles am I creating with my platform to get it to go where I want it to go. Because sometimes it's not dead center of the court, right? Sometimes I may want to, there are times where I want to move my center forward a little bit. If I'm passing the ball over here in zone 1, I don't want to just generically pass it here. I want to maybe lead her going forward a little bit more. Because in general, setters are more efficient going forward and backwards. But that's that whole concept of I need to be trained to be able to set angles from anywhere. And once you learn how to manipulate your platform and create angles, there's very few serves that really beat you in that respect, because you can react to almost anything at that point, right?
Are you finding that out because arms are faster than feet?
That's just kind of a general principle that definitely helps. The first thing we work on usually in the gym is just picking a side. And this is pretty easy for us to just go, hey, right. And I can get my platform out to the right a little bit. It can just be here, right, to my right. But that reaction happens a lot faster and allows me to be a little bit more accurate than right. And then I'm here, but then the ball ends up on my left, right? So we need to just learn how to see that line of the serve first. And get comfortable with the idea that sometimes this is all you need versus all of a sudden I'm trying to do too much with my feet and then I get caught unbalanced sometimes. So yes, general principle, your hands are faster than your feet, and your hands from a fine motor movements perspective are able to make those fine adjustments a lot more accurately than your feet are. I don't know how many of you guys can write your signature with your toes as well as you can with your hands, right?
And they're gonna have the, one of the sitting players here tomorrow who can address what do you do when you're on the team and you only have one leg, or you have no legs and you can still be a really good server.
Other questions? Literally about anything. Up until Eric kicks me out of the room.
Dude, you're here until 7. I get the break.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you want 4 attackers going at all times. Can you just talk to me about what your system looks like when a setter digs first ball?
Yeah, that's probably your one scenario where you don't have that unless you have a pretty special libero. So for instance, Italy's libero, Monica De Gennaro, she will come in, setter will take the ball high in the middle, she'll come from left back, and then she'll set a gap, or 31, whatever you want to call it, over her shoulder from the 10-foot line. She's just a really special player, right? The 4 routes at all times for the most part is our first ball offense, right? Once you get in transition, you do what you can to get a good swing, right? But ideally, if we're in system-ish, in transition, we can still get 4 routes going. The difference is, like you said, if our setter takes it, generally speaking, we're probably more now just pin to pin. And for us offensively, we care so little about being tricky with our non-setters. We just want, can I get the best swing possible? And we can teach our attackers to have at least 2 different tools offensively to use when they're attacking that out-of-system ball. They're going to be able to make something happen, even if it's not a kill right away, at least get them the other side in some trouble to where you get an easier opportunity the next time the ball comes back over. That whole concept of winning within the rally. But same thing with our serving, we care so little about trickery, right? Just how good can we be on this repetition?
You had a player go down, pretty important player go down
2 of them.
a week in, and then the next one went down. And so, the one came back, the other didn't. But how does that affect your job? How does that affect your scouting and what you're telling the team? Does it change much, or is it?
The one that changed it more, so let me put it this way. We talked about the lefty, so Annie Drews is out here right now. So let's go. This is a rotation 1 stat for USA, right? Jordan Polter, our center's way over here. Libero standing next to her, so obviously the outside's not there. We did that downstairs. We stacked the other outside over here. Jordan Larson's over here. But instead of, you'll see a lot of teams with their opposite kind of run across the net here. You'll watch Annie run around the court to come around. So let's just take a look at that real quick. Okay, why do we do this? Because one, our opposite is most comfortable hitting on the right side, especially as a left-handed hitter. She was so much more comfortable hitting on the right. And quite frankly, it was to the tune of about 300 attacking points. So, do I want her hitting 450 on the red? Or do I want her hitting 150 on the go? I feel like that was a pretty easy decision to make. Okay? The opposite that started the Olympics for us was Jordan Thompson. Right-handed, was naturally an outside hitter at the University of Cincinnati. So, did we have her run around, or did we let her hit the go? She was comfortable hitting on both sides, and since 2019, when she first joined us, she was hitting over 570 on the go. So, why would we have her run around? We wouldn't. So one of those changes we made when Jordan Thompson went down as a right-handed opposite, is we went back to the row 1 stack run around. So that's one thing that changes tactically for us. Anything else as far as scouting the other team, nothing changed, right? But there's some system things for your team that changes when all of a sudden a player, you change from a right-handed player to a left-handed player, you change from a taller player to a shorter player. There are adjustments you might have to make on your side of the net, but that didn't affect my job as far as scouting the other teams.
So, hockey basket, I guess, since no one else is talking.
Yep, one other question.
Oh,
So you mentioned, this might be a two-part question, but you mentioned that you don't like try to hide anything, like in the serve, or like you just rather it to be good. Like for your offense, would you say that's the same?
We play a pretty straightforward offense. We don't do a lot of crossing route. This is the fanciest thing we do. And the route itself is not really fancy. She's still just running typical red. We're not doing crossing patterns and things like that. We're not having players approach in one way and jump out the other way. You'll see that a lot on the men's side, especially with the middles. We play pretty straightforward offense, knowing that one, the speed we run creates a lot of seams, and two, we have some pretty darn physical attackers who have multiple tools so they can adjust to the scenario that's in front of them. So we put a lot of trust on our team to just execute our default. Be great at your default. You can make adjustments, little adjustments here or there, but if you're not great at what you do as a team, you're gonna start to miss the boat of it if you start to try and change your systems point to point, day to day. Because then you go to being mediocre at two things instead of being great at one, right?
So as my, like as a student, I watched NAU, which is where I go to school, and like from I'm not in the gym, I don't know anything about their team. I feel like there's simple offense and it's slow, so that I feel like other team can read it easily. So with that type of team, would you work on the speed first and then the variation?
I would work on, honestly, individual athlete execution over anything else. I think a program like that, which is very like the program that I'm with right now at GCU, to be perfectly honest, we don't have the physicality and personnel to run this fast, create those kinds of seams. We don't pass well enough to make it happen, even though we are one of the better passing teams in our conference. And we just don't have the attacking personnel that can be in the air long enough to wait for that ball to come across and then attack it that quick. So our job as coaches is to adjust our system to our personnel. So we slowed down our offense compared to that. We still are running, we're trying to run 4 routes at times in certain rotations. But it comes down to, can we play a clean, effective game? And I talked about it earlier, but the whole idea of the better volleyball team, generally speaking, wins. Regardless of your system, if you're the better volleyball team, you have a better chance at winning at least. So I don't need to force the issue with changing too many things here and there just because I feel like we need to speed it up or just because I've seen another team do it. No, can I be great at my system before I start to try and add wrinkles, if you will, here and there.
So you mentioned that you keep it very simple offensively. And that's the fanciest thing you do. What advice would you give coaches that coach at the club level that want to defense?
If you're gonna do it, measure your success rate. So you can validate, again, we talked about early on, the what and why of scouting. You know, you wanna know objectively, is this something that's actually effective? Or is it not? Am I just doing it because the kids have fun doing it? But then all of a sudden, we're taking time away from being able to actually just hit a go ball or being able to actually just run something quick in the middle because we're doing all this movement. You have to measure to know whether you're allocating time to the right things or not. So if you want to experiment with that stuff, you're gonna lose some time working on some other things, and you have to decide whether or not that's worth it for you or not. I'm not gonna tell you not to do it, because honestly, sometimes adding a wrinkle, which is a little bit more fun, will keep your kids engaged. And maybe that's more important than running this one specific play, but just to add a wrinkle and keep them engaged, having fun, is just gonna elevate the level of play in the gym in general, right? But I wouldn't, honestly, I have a preference to just being really great at what we are trying to do before I try and do anything else.
Since you coach 15s but go into the gym with the best in the world, how do you help a player increase their range when they're in the net or even back row? Because a lot of the younger players just have a shot, essentially. Is there anything that you can bring down from the higher level to help teach the lesser skilled players to increase their range?
I'd say 2 things pop to mind first, which is relevant regardless of what level of athlete you're working with. Pin attackers tend to be pretty bad at getting their feet to the ball. Can we agree on that? Right? So if we can spend some time getting better at getting our feet to the ball, all of a sudden we have the ability now to contact the ball somewhere and make some changes. Whether it's I'm trying to go on a crossbody swing down the line, I want to go a little bit sharper, I want to work on wiping the ball off the blocker's hands on a tighter set. None of that matters if you can't get your feet to the ball to actually jump and attack the ball at a high point. So before you start talking about range with where you're finishing the ball, there's also the range at which I can get my feet to the ball as an attacker, right? Talk about out of system balls and a ball is set 14 feet inside on the net as an outside hitter. Can I still get do I have the range as an outside hitter to get my feet to that ball, still jump up high, to have range to go to different spots versus now I'm just leapfrogging, reaching out for it, and all I can do is tip, right? That's another way that I like to define range, is my range to actually get to a wider variety of set locations. To me, that has a bigger impact on our ability to play at some of the younger levels, because you have a higher now percentage of balls that you can actually swing at aggressively. And then we start to talk about, once we get our feet to more balls, what are some of those tools and finishes we can do to change where the ball finishes versus where I'm starting with my contact point.
You said two things, that was one.
Yeah, the other one is just building scenarios. You're gonna have to do it in practice, and honestly, sometimes you're gonna have to do it where you go into a match scenario knowing that we are working on something specific. And in practice, I like to give bonus points more than anything else. But you'll get a bonus point for having a tool shot off the outside blocker's hands kind of thing. You build scenarios for them to be working on that in a live play scenario. And eventually that starts to translate to the just confidence level of being able to execute it. And I say you have to do that sometimes in match scenarios and not be frustrated when they miss. Because say I'm aiming for that right side blocker's outside hand and I miss it and I go out of bounds, you can either be frustrated that we lost that point and hit it out, or you can encourage them by telling them, I love what you were trying to do, we've been working on that all week, keep getting after it, right? And then all of a sudden they can start to execute that down the road. But the worst thing you can do is work on something all week long in practice and make good job, good job, good job, get to a match on Saturday at the tournament and go, why are you hitting out of bounds? And now they stop trying to do that and stop developing. So those are the two things that I kind of thought about. One was the idea of range, of getting your feet to more locations of sets, and two, to try and actually encourage them to execute some of those things. You need to build those scenarios into practice and make sure that you're still praising them for attempting those skills when the points start to matter.
This is a similar question, I guess, but we have an athlete that she can bomb the ball if the set is on the net, right? Like a typical perfect set. Maybe that's our fault is practicing with in that scenario so much, but she's struggling now at a 17U of hitting the ball, well off the net, which is out of system, which is most of the time. So she, has amazing vertical, can whip that arm, but it struggles clearing the net when it's off the net.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, and I'm guilty of this too, at coaching earlier on in their careers, of making it feel good in the gym and making the drill look good and look pretty, or making them feel good by every attack attempt we have working on attacking is on just the coach's toss in the perfect spot. Let's be honest, not all coaches toss great, but if you find that one that does, awesome. We need to build scenarios where they have to deal with the read aspect of where that set is going. Because to me, it's not that she doesn't know how to attack. Definitely she can bomb a ball in a perfect scenario. She just isn't well practiced enough at this point of reading the line of the set to know whether it's coming off the net or on. So can she wait and make that read to stay behind it and actually attack it? So we need to then build more scenarios, maybe intentionally at times, of setting the ball off the net when she might expect it to be on the net, right? Can I wait? I don't know what tempo you're running, if you're on first step, second step, tempo into your attack, but can I wait and read that and really go slow and fast and stay behind that, right? And that's that kind of same thing also. Can I read that? Is the set going wide or is that set going inside? If I'm always approaching towards the antenna, how am I going to then be really good at increasing my range to a set that dies inside? And conversely, if I'm always approaching way inside and I'm jumping from inside the court here, how do I hit a ball that's closer to the antenna? I need to be able to build scenarios for them to read the path of the set so I can expect them to be able to execute on multiple scenarios. You can still do that with tossing, mind you, right? Rather than tossing straight up and down, I can toss a little off the net, or I start to increase the distance away from that pin, and now they need to read the distance of that toss going to them and read it coming from a further direction, which is more like a game scenario. But obviously you want to try and get it to be live off of the setter's hands as soon as possible. But those are ways you can build a variation in a sort of, I throw, you go kind of drill scenario. Attacking is, I can toss from further away now. I can still give them perfect balls, but now they need to time it more because now they have to time the distance of the toss. Or maybe it's a self-toss and I'm setting it to them instead, whatever it is. But you can add variation to those repetitions by just increasing the distance away from them that you are. Now you can drift it on and off and all that kind of stuff and just force some of those scenarios so it's not perfect every time. speaking, we're talking about efficiencies when a ball is set 3 feet off the net to 5 feet off the net, 3 feet to 5 feet in the court, just to make the numbers pretty. Outside hitters at the top level are hitting about 300, right? Once you get that 5 to 7 feet, it drops to about 200. Once you are at the antenna wide, you're hitting 0. Once you are within 2 feet of the net, you're hitting negative. Again, broad generality with kind of dumbed down numbers, but that's sort of the range that you're looking at. Now, what happened in this last 2 USA seasons was that was a huge base of our philosophy with USA Volleyball for the last 9 years. What we found, though, is that we became more comfortable because we started building scenarios for them to become more comfortable at the ball that's tighter to the net, inside, out of system specifically. Reason being is that there's one specific tool that is almost a kill. 60% of the time it works every time, we can put it that way, right? Is the wipe, or the jam, or whatever you want to call it. When you go up on a tight ball, you push it into the blocker, you wipe it out of bounds. Or you go up and their hands are still up high and I can go up and just wipe it high off their hands, or just swing it high off their hands. We were able to create a good emphasis on the focus of increasing our range to get our feet to the ball tight to the net, so that we can jump straight up and down and use those tools to get a lot of kills. You're going to see it a lot in the NCAA tournament. Texas specifically uses that skill a ton, to the point that John Cook is trying to outlaw the move. But good luck trying to do that. But that is a skill that I think is under-taught and underutilized, specifically in the women's game. Guys seem to figure that out on their own. But on the women's side, we spend so much time focusing on keep the ball off the net, keep the ball off the net, keep the ball off the net, that we never give them the opportunities to train. What do I do when the ball's tight to the net? Number one, get your feet there. We gotta read it, get our feet there. And 2, what tools can I use when I get there? So we actually started to emphasize our out of system setting. Instead of being 5 feet off, 5 feet in, we started emphasizing, hey, let's aim for that 3 feet off the net instead of 5 feet off the net. You start to talk about normal distribution. Half of them are going to go further off, half of them are going to go a little bit tighter, because we wanted to train ourselves and give ourselves opportunity for those freebie points that are 0 to 2 feet to the net to use that skill. So the point where that whole idea of 0 to 2 feet to the net previously was negative on a lot of the swings. It was a really high percentage kill when we used the other tool. But the problem is that that's not used if you look at volleyball in general on the women's side. That's not a skill that's taught and used very frequently.
I forgot that. This, how did they both get injured? One not so bad, the other one out. Was it a knee injury? Was it an ankle?
They were both ankles,
Ankles, and were they
and they both landed on our middle blockers.
our own middle blockers? Okay.
Jordan Poulter was able to come back pretty quickly because she basically had no ligaments in that ankle anyway. She sprained that ankle so many times. So she was like, all right, well, I got to rest one day and I'll be back, and kind of work my way back. Jordan Thompson has never had an ankle injury in her entire volleyball and basketball career. Now, she's never had an ankle injury. So the first time you sprain your ankle, man, that can be pretty brutal. So it took her a little bit longer to get back.
But it wasn't them going underneath the net, landing on the blocker.
Both of them were when we were blocking.
Yeah.
So you gotta get to the casino and place your bets with all this inside information you have on the game, so I get that, so, but just, maybe to wrap up here, cause we're running a little long. We all wanna feed you with our players, we wanna give you more national team players in the future, you know? Tell us what we can do as coaches, what can we do better? Give us maybe 3 things that we need to do better, whether it's in practices or philosophy or whatever, and that's a pretty broad question, but Marwan told me to ask it, so, what are 3 things that we can do to get you players, more players in your gym?
I'm gonna sound very Luka-esque here if you've ever heard him talk, but we need more players that can play the whole game. One, because we have less substitutions, so we can't do the DS thing in the back row. So we need outside hitters. We need those bangers to be able to pass also. But we need middles who can serve and play defense, because liberos cannot serve internationally. We need middles and opposites who can set the ball and play defense in the back row. We need attackers who can hit front row and back row. We need players who can play the whole game. That's the biggest thing. So the idea of early specialization by position is a risky one. It may be a shortcut for them to make their varsity team as a freshman, but when it comes time to, hey, maybe she has this growth spurt, right, late in her career, and she's been a libero from 12s to 15s, and then all of a sudden 16, 17, she grows 6 inches, right? But we never gave her opportunities to block, never gave her opportunities to hit. She's being shortchanged in her future of the game, even just, not even national team, just college, of where she can get to and what she can do if we don't allow players to play the whole game. It is extremely valuable, and I'm going to talk about college now, to have well-rounded players, because yes, we have 600 substitutions, but if I don't have to use them for that player, it allows me to then plug holes elsewhere also on my roster and in the match. So the more well-rounded we are as a team in all positions on the floor, the better off that those athletes are going to be down the road. And at some point, yes, I'm 16, I'm trying to get recruited to go play college. I've already probably hit my max as far as height. You know, maybe I start to specialize a lot more at that point. But I'll tell you right now, as I'm recruiting for GCU, I like middle blockers who can hit on both pins. I like a middle blocker who can hit a go. I like a middle blocker who can hit out of the back row. I like a middle blocker that can serve and play defense, because it saves me substitutions from having to use a serving sub, right? Give me a 5'6" setter who knows how to do an aggressive 3-step crossover blocking move over a setter who has never played in the back row. Because one, that's what I have right now, and she's freshman of the year and then 2-time conference setter of the year, right? But two, that allows me to do different things with my roster in general, right? Because guess what? You run out of substitutions and your short kid that's playing the front row, she knows what to do, right? You've all seen it on TV at times, or even your teams has had it. Your DS, you run out of substitutions and now your DS has to play middle. Has she ever blocked before? I hope so, right? She can at least make some sort of a reaction, or at least be somewhat comfortable in front to know, yeah, I'm not gonna have an effect on that set, so I'm gonna curl and roll off and play defense here, right? They need to be exposed to different parts of the game before they can maximize their contributions to their team.
Jeff, would you say that we need more of, we talked about this downstairs, would you say the right side is the weak side?
Opposites?
Yes.
Internationally, and it's getting there now in college too, on the women's side, it's already been that way on the men's side. Your opposite is your cleanup hitter. Your opposite is probably your leading scorer. All the jump balls, go to your opposite, front row, back row. Your in-system balls, you're probably setting her. All the top scorers in Tokyo were opposites.
Does that mean we're bad at defending the right side?
That's part of it. Left side blockers, outside hitters. We probably spend more time with them on serve and pass and attack than we do on blocking. So that's a big piece of it. And that's not a wrong decision necessarily, but it's also, eventually you get these outside hitters who, they get to college, they get to the pro level, and they figure out you're not really executing at a high enough level on the receive side. Let's just stick you out on the right and let you just go bang, right? So you find somebody like a Tijana Voskovic for Serbia, who is just gnarly, right? But she's gonna be, they set her 70% of the time as their opposite in their offense. They literally have an outside hitter in Tokyo who they maybe set her 7 times in a match. It could be a 5-set match, they'll set her no more than 10 times. Right? They're gonna set their opposite till the cows come home. Right? Paola Agodu for Italy. She started in the Olympics when she was 16, 17, in Rio. And then what was it, a month later, she played at Junior Worlds for the U18s, after being the starting opposite for Italy in the Olympics. Just contacting the ball at 10-6, 10-8, right? And serving the ball at 65 miles an hour, right? Just feed your big hitter, right? And everybody else can fill in. And you see that on the men's side, is the opposite. They don't run a lot of slides because their opposites are gonna run out of the back row and hit the ball on the net basically in that zone. Internationally, on the women's side, that's what's starting to happen, right? In college, in the States, in the NCAA, maybe a little bit less so because you lack enough of that physicality around the country. You only have really a few of those kids each year. But you're starting to see the opposite become a larger part of the offensive game plan for most teams. You have to diversify your offense.
Last question. Anything?
I had one
Oh,
really quick. So I have a player that also plays beach and indoor. Do you think at some point she needs to pick one or like?
Karka's answer would be he loves it.
Okay, good.
He's a little biased because he obviously won gold in both.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, beach is going to force them to play the whole game. The one thing I would caution against is not having enough of a run-up to your indoor competitive season after stopping beach, because the pace of the game speeds up. And you need some time to reacclimate to that. So we had our conference libero of the year at GCU, also plays on our beach team. And she opted out of the COVID season in the spring. So she hadn't played indoor in a year, right? Hadn't touched an indoor ball in a year. She came in and still was libero of the year. But we had enough time in preseason to get her caught back up to speed. And then because she has to read and play the whole game in the beach, she's able to make all these crazy angles because you're not, like, it's not that you're not allowed to receive with your hands, but man, you gotta be perfect with it for them not to call it, right? So she's really good at doing a lot of those things, which she would not be as good at if she didn't have to play the whole game and cover so much court playing beach. There was a question in the back. So.
What's your college major?
My college major? I started when I went in as a freshman as a computer engineering major, and then they showed me I had to do 5 semesters of calculus, so I changed majors. So I became a business major. I only had to take 1 semester calculus, so that was good. And then I worked corporate for 7 years out of college. So that's when I was coaching high school, eventually started a club and coached a club. And then eventually I was spending so many more of my brain cycles thinking about planning practice and reviewing video and doing this. I was booking conference rooms at work to take my work laptop to take a conference call, but then I was doing scout work on my personal laptop on the side while they're droning on about something I didn't care about. So at some point it was just like, I was young enough to still make change and take that risk without abruptly, taking too much risk to other people's lives that I may have impacted had I, been in a different phase of my life.
Did you play growing up?
I started playing at 18 years old. I started playing senior year of high school. I didn't know we had a boys team. I was doing high jump, long jump, and high hurdles for our track team. And I skipped the first day of practice my junior year to go play pickup basketball, and then I sprained my ankle and I couldn't face my coaches, so I just never went back to track and field. And then my friends came and I was like, hey, why don't you come play volleyball? I was like, we have volleyball? And then I just kind of fell in love with it. Eric knows my high school coach a little bit. It was Al Parlo too. Yeah. I came to the gym, my friends came in, it was junior year, midway through the season at that point when they called me in. I was like, hey, Jeff wants to play. And he goes, all right, well, can you jump? And I go, sure. And high school gyms, I got basketball hoops everywhere, so I just jumped up, grabbed the rim with both my hands, and he goes, cool. I'd say you're on the team, but we're too far past in the season for you to play this season. We'll see you next year. And so I played my senior year, and then I started and ran the club team at Stevens Tech, which is a D3 team out in New Jersey, and just fell in love with the coaching aspect of it as I went along, because I go back and volunteer at my old high school throughout college. So eventually you kind of find your purpose after bouncing around careers after that, before that. So it just kind of happened, and I was willing to take a leap of faith.
If you had $14 to put on one team to win the NCAA championship, who do you pick?
$14.
$14.
It's more than you're paying me right now, actually.
Well, $2 more, but still. Yeah.
You know what? My heart tells me Wisconsin. Just because I love Dana Rickey. And I think it's kind of her turn. And I'll be annoyed at her for going for her 5th year of college and not going pro if she doesn't win this year. I think it's going to be Wisconsin, Texas in the final again. I think Louisville eventually is going to get out physicaled at the net. And then, yeah, I think Texas is going to take that other half over probably, in my mind, Purdue over Pitt.
Too late on that.
Or was that? Oh, yeah.
Wait, who won? Pitt beat Purdue?
Well, I was wrong there.
$14, dude, down the drain. It's harsh.
Well, no, because you said the final. Who wins?
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But yeah, I still see it in my mind, Texas and Wisconsin have the most tools at their disposal. The question is, can they put it together at the right time? I think Louisville's been putting things together at the right time with what they have. The question is, can they sustain that against a much more physical presence on the other side of the net?
Okay. Last chance. Any questions? Oh,
You talked about culture a little bit. What are some ways that you really kept your culture together and they came together as a team? I know there's like little activities and stuff, but what are some main ways?
Honestly, for GCU and then with the national team, you talk about little activities here or there. Honestly, for us, and by us I mean USA and then GCU, it was a lot of tears. There were a lot of tears. It came down to being comfortable with being extremely vulnerable with one each other. So we had a lot of meetings where there were no coaches, players only, because they're not going to be as honest with each other if the coaches are there. The problem is you need to trust that your roster is mature enough to keep that meeting going in the direction it needs to go. But we do an activity at GCU, we call it roll call. So before the start of any day, we do weights before we go into the practice gym. So before weights, they meet as a team and they do roll call real quick, 5-10 minutes. Everybody goes around in a circle and just says, hey, this is what's going on in my life right now. Positively, negatively. Hey, I'm having a great day. I just got my hair done yesterday. It looks so good. I'm so happy, right? Awesome. Hey, everybody cheers, right? Next time around, somebody else goes and, hey, like, my grandfather's in the hospital. So if I seem a little distracted in practice today, I need you guys to give me a little bit of grace. And that's the preemptive word is grace. As a coaching staff, can we give our players grace when they make mistakes, whether it's on the court or off the court? And as players and teammates, can I give my teammates grace when they're not pulling their end of the bargain at that time as well? Because a lot of times you don't know what's going on outside of the lines. So you need to build that culture where they're comfortable being vulnerable with each other. And that then builds their relationships off the court as well, because now they start to learn about each other outside of just practice and outside of just matches. It's a tall task to ask for, I think, when they're super young. But I think when they get to a certain point, once they get honestly into high school, that socially they should be starting to become a little bit more developed socially, that you want to build environments where they're comfortable enough to start that process. I don't think you're ever going to fully get there for as short as a club season sometimes can be, because you're not with them every single day, right? But we love doing roll call The only times I've ever heard about what's been talked about in roll call is when somebody comes out cracking up and they just have to tell us what was so funny. But we have come starting practice with girls in tears. And it has almost always been good tears. Because we have a roster of 18 of them, their eyes are all puffy and red, and we're like, oh crap, this is gonna be a really bad practice. But they just connected on such a deep level talking about this kind of stuff that it was a collective cry for that person who opened up. And now that person felt so much more comfortable going into the practice gym knowing, okay, if I don't play well today, I don't have to break down and pull it all on my shoulders because of what's going on outside of the lines. My teammates have my back. So that's been a huge culture shift for us at GCU as well as in USA.
Thank you.
You think that's mostly beneficial for girls?
I've never tried it with the boys. I would say the emotional side of it will come a lot faster on the girls' side. I think the buy-in side of it will probably come in a little bit faster on the girls' side. Just being a guy, emotionally, we tend to be fairly shielded. So it's a tall ask a lot of times on the men's side. Especially the younger ones who, I said this to Eric earlier, talking about coaching boys, but man, boys are dumb, right? So it's just like, it is what it is, right? You get that 14-year-old knucklehead who's just easily distracted, you know, to get them into that scenario, to hold their tongue and not make that sarcastic remark, to actually feel comfortable to open up instead of like, I'm afraid to get made fun of by everybody else. I think it's a hard ask for teenagers in general, but I feel like guys are so apt to make jokes really quickly that sometimes it can distract from what you're trying to accomplish. But that's honestly just my opinion. There's no science behind that. That's just me being a guy and talking about how immature I was at that age.
All right, last call. Any questions?
I have one last call, real quick question. So I have.
$5. Or just a Jolly Rancher.
Yes, what flavor?
Grape?
Just kidding. So we had this team and we sent out like a monkey survey before we started. We're like, hey, who wants to travel this year? We've never traveled before. We just have been still going. Who's interested in playing in college? You know, in college recruiting, this kind of exposure. And we were surprised over the 5 foot nothing libero. You know, anyways, the girls that were like, I want to play. But at what point is it our job as coaches to do that reality dose of, you know, how tall do you need to be that you can be considered or looked at? What does your vertical need to be? You know.
I think the question, or as coaches, the question we have to ask ourselves and the answers we need to remind ourselves of is, okay, how many levels of volleyball is there in college? There's a ton.
Right.
There's a huge range. So I want to play volleyball in college. Okay, reality check, what level are you trying to aspire to play? Are you trying to go play at the University of Texas? Or are you trying to play at the University of Texas in Dallas, which is, I think, a D2 school, right? Or are you trying to play somewhere else? Like, there's so many levels, NAIA, Division 2, Division 3, JUCO, all that kind of stuff. Club even. There are some club teams, honestly, that would beat varsity teams in Division 1, especially on the men's side. There's some really gnarly men's club teams out there. So, in my opinion, every kid that comes through your system that has aspirations to play club, or is not sure if they have aspirations to play college, or not sure if they have aspirations to play college, they all have the opportunity, right? The question is, where do they end up? And they have to be, that's the reality check of, hey, at some point, as a 5'7" outside hitter, who does not have a 42-inch vertical, you may not be a Division I starting outside hitter, but you may make that roster as a libero, if your skills are up to snuff there, or even as that DS kind of backup outside hitter option. There's a lot of D1 programs that have smaller outside hitters that will come off the bench at times, or are just really good all-around volleyball players that just elevate the level of their practice gym. You have opportunities there too, right? So you just have to be clear in how we respond to those players about what the opportunities are.
And they look differently. Yeah. Okay.
How much, like from a junior college component, do you guys recruit out of? at all, or do you see being recruited?
I think it varies by university. Some universities actually bank on getting a lot of their roster off of junior colleges, that kind of thing. At least for me, GCU, for us, it's more of a, it's less of a primary option so much as it is we're trying to fill a hole option. So we've got, hey, the scholarship opened up. There's nothing that's really working out for us on the transfer portal, and let's look at junior college, right? Or every now and then you're going through and you're late in the recruiting process and you're like, your top 2 kids that you invested all this time in have decided to commit elsewhere, right? So, hey, we have this late scholarship opportunity open, and this JUCO kid has been pestering us, and hey, she's pretty good, right? We'll still look at it that way. But I think most colleges start looking super young, just because that's how recruiting is turned into at this point in time, where they're looking at kids at 15 years old and trying to see if they want to commit that kid. You know, if you're 15, you're probably not in junior college yet, right? So that's kind of where, at least personally, I am, is I'm looking for that kid that I can invest in 4 years into, more so than I'm going to look at that kid that I may only have for 2 seasons. But there are times where you need that kid because you want somebody who's already mature who can slot into your roster and just go, instead of having to deal with a 17-year-old who's just trying to figure out what college is all about, right? So there's different priorities there based on where you're